There are truths that the very bedrock of this world clutches tighter than any human heart ever could. Secrets whispered by the wind through ancient pines, buried beneath layers of rock and time, often lie undisturbed, waiting for an unwitting hand or paw to unearth them. For all our striving, our relentless digging into the past, the earth holds its forgotten tales with an enduring silence that mocks our fleeting memories and the fragile narratives we construct. It keeps its secrets better than any person ever could, swallowing lives, triumphs, and betrayals whole, leaving only the stoic landscape as a witness. High in the craggy embrace of the Appalachian peaks, where the wind carved stories into granite and the timber wolf sang laments to the moon, lived Ilara. She was a woman etched by the very mountains she called home, her face a map of countless sunrises and bitter winters, each line a testament to hardship endured and sorrow silently carried. Life had long since stripped her of illusions, leaving her with the stark, unyielding reality of survival. Her days were a quiet testament to endurance, a solitary dance with the unforgiving rhythm of the mountain. She gathered firewood, her hands calloused and raw, each splinter a minor pain in a life accustomed to larger ones. She hunted small game, her aim true, her heart heavy, knowing that every rabbit or squirrel meant another day's meager meal. Loneliness was not an occasional visitor. It was a permanent resident, a cold presence that had settled deep in her bones after years of loss and abandonment had hollowed out her world. Her only constant companion, a wiry, brindle-coated hound named Jasper, was more than just a dog. He was the living, breathing echo of a life that once held warmth, now reduced to the flickering flame of their shared existence. Jasper was her shadow, her confidant, the silent witness to her quiet grief. He never judged, never asked for more than a scratch behind the ears and a share of whatever meager rations they managed to scrape together. He was loyalty personified, a stark contrast to the human betrayals that had shaped Ilara's solitary path. One crisp autumn morning, as the first tendrils of frost clung to the brittle leaves, a routine that had been etched into their lives for years was abruptly shattered. Ilara was preparing for her daily trek to check her snares, Jasper padding faithfully at her heels, when suddenly the dog tensed. His ears pricked, his nose twitched, and a low, guttural whine rumbled in his chest, a sound Ilara rarely heard, reserved only for the most profound disturbances. Before she could utter a command, Jasper bolted. He shot into the dense woods, a blur of brindle fur disappearing between the gnarled trunks of ancient oaks, his usual careful pace replaced by a desperate, unwavering urgency. Ilara called his name, her voice raspy with concern, but he didn't falter. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Jasper was never reckless, never strayed without purpose. Something deep, something primal was pulling him. With a sigh that carried the weight of her weariness, Ilara picked up her worn leather satchel and followed, her old rifle clutched in her hand, the familiar weight a small comfort against the burgeoning mystery. The chase was long, arduous, leading her deeper into a less traveled part of the forest, through thickets of thorn and over treacherous, moss-slicked rocks. Her breath hitched in her throat, her muscles ached, but the sight of Jasper's unwavering focus kept her moving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jasper skidded to a halt at the base of a steep hillside. There, half swallowed by time and nature, was a collapsed opening, almost entirely hidden beneath a thick curtain of ivy and a jumble of ancient rock slides. It was a wound in the earth, a gaping maw that spoke of forgotten industry, a place where human endeavor had once tried to tame the wild, only to be consumed by it. It was unmistakably the entrance to an abandoned mine. A cold dread seeped into Ilara's heart. These mountains were riddled with such scars, dangerous and unstable, places best left undisturbed. She hesitated, her common sense screaming caution. But Jasper, oblivious to her fears, began to whine, a high-pitched, insistent sound that vibrated with an almost human desperation. He scratched furiously at the rubble with his front paws, then looked back at Alara, his intelligent eyes pleading, demanding action. His conviction was absolute, a force that Alara, for all her ingrained caution, found impossible to resist. This wasn't just a dog's whim. This was a summons. With a resigned sigh, Alara dropped her rifle and began to clear the path, her hands, accustomed to the rough work of survival, pulling away loose rocks and tearing at the stubborn ivy. It was slow, back-breaking labor, but Jasper's relentless whimpers spurred her on. When a narrow passage was finally clear, revealing a gaping blackness beyond, a cold gust of air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, snaked out to greet them. Alara retrieved her oil lantern, its flickering flame offering a paltry defiance against the encroaching gloom. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the darkness, Jasper pushing past her, his tail wagging with an almost frantic excitement. The air grew colder, heavy, pressing in on her, and the silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic drip of water echoing like whispers from another time. It felt like trespassing on ghosts, a sacrilege against the forgotten past. Rusted tools lay scattered on the uneven floor, half buried in the mud, testaments to forgotten labor. Broken timbers leaned at dangerous angles, threatening to collapse under the slightest tremor. Each step was a plunge deeper into a history she hadn't known existed, a journey into the earth's silent, forgotten heart. Alara's lantern beam danced across the rough-hewn walls, revealing nothing but raw rock and decay, until in the deepest recess of the chamber, Jasper began to claw furiously at a rotted wooden barrier, his desperation renewed, his conviction unwavering. Jasper's desperate insistence was a raw, primal plea that Alara, for all her weariness, could not ignore. The rotted wood of the barrier was thick with generations of dust and the cold breath of the earth, but his relentless scratching, his plaintive whines, were a call to action. With a grunt, Alara dropped her lantern and began to tear at the decaying timbers. Her hands, accustomed to the rough work of survival, found purchase in the splintered edges, pulling away chunks of wood that crumbled like ancient bone. The air filled with the acrid scent of mold and disturbed earth. Each piece she dislodged revealing more of the impenetrable darkness beyond. It was a slow, arduous task, her muscles protesting with every heave, but Jasper's unwavering focus, his nose pressed to the widening gap, kept her moving. Finally, with a sharp crack that echoed eerily in the confined space, a large section gave way, tumbling into a void. A gust of stale, heavy air, thick with the smell of forgotten time, rushed out, carrying with it a chill that sank deep into her bones. Alara retrieved her lantern, its fragile flame now cutting into an even deeper, more profound darkness. She squeezed through the narrow opening, Jasper immediately following, his tail giving a tentative thump against the floor. They were in a smaller, secret chamber, sealed away from the main tunnel. The air here was even colder, hushed, as if time itself had forgotten to breathe. The lantern beam danced across the space, revealing a scene frozen in amber, untouched for what felt like centuries. Crates, stacked haphazardly against the rough-hewn walls, lay covered in a thick shroud of dust. A pile of leather-bound journals, their pages brittle and discolored, sat on a makeshift table carved from rock. And in the center of it all, squat and unyielding, was a heavy iron chest, its surface pitted with rust, a formidable lock clinging stubbornly to its lid. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, traced its way down Alara's spine. This wasn't just an abandoned space. It was a mausoleum of secrets, a place where human stories had been laid to rest. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. Jasper, however, showed no such apprehension. He nudged her hand with his wet nose, then moved towards the iron chest, a soft whine escaping him. His conviction was infectious, pulling her forward. Alara approached the chest, her hand trembling as she reached for the lock. It was old, rusted solid, but as her fingers brushed against it, It gave way with a faint, metallic groan, the latch springing open with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for this moment. With a deep, shaky breath, Ilara lifted the heavy lid. The lantern light flooded the interior, and her breath hitched. Inside, nestled amongst layers of ancient cloth, lay a king's ransom. Gleaming gold nuggets, rough-hewn and heavy with the earth's raw power, sparkled back at her. Silver coins, tarnished but still bearing the faint imprint of forgotten monarchs, spilled from canvas bags. And beneath it all, crisp and surprisingly well-preserved, were bundles of mining deeds, legal documents hinting at vast claims and untold wealth. It was more money than she had ever seen, more than she had ever dreamed of in her life of meager survival. It was enough to change everything. But it was not just the treasure that held her gaze. Tucked beneath the deeds were a stack of letters, bound with a faded ribbon. Their paper was fragile, the ink smudged in places, but the script was clear, elegant, telling a story that began to unfold with each trembling page she turned. They were personal accounts, desperate pleas, and ultimately, a tragic chronicle of the men who had worked this very mine. They spoke of back-breaking labor, of hope for a better life, of a community forged in the dark. Then the tone shifted. The letters detailed a betrayal, a ruthless scheme by greedy partners who had seized control, left their fellow miners to die in a rig collapse, and then sealed the mine, not just to bury the gold, but to bury their monstrous guilt and the evidence of their crime. The final letters were heartbreaking laments, written by men trapped in the dark, their last words a testament to the treachery that had stolen their lives and their future. As Ilara read, the cold air of the mine seemed to thicken, pressing in on her, carrying the whispers of those lost souls. The names, the dates, the raw emotion of betrayal resonated with a chilling familiarity. Memories, long suppressed by the daily grind of survival, surged to the surface of her mind like ghosts from her own past. She saw her father's face, etched with the burden of insurmountable debts, the bitter arguments that had torn her family apart, the quiet, crushing shame of abandonment that had left her adrift in a world that offered little mercy. Her own family's hardships, the broken promises, the slow erosion of trust, mirrored the brutal tale unfolding in her hands. The miner's fate wasn't just a historical tragedy. It was a living echo of the same human frailties, the same destructive greed that had shaped her own solitary path. Jasper, sensing the shift in her, pressed closer, his warm body a grounding presence against the cold reality of the past. His unwavering loyalty, his simple, pure devotion, stood in stark contrast to the intricate web of deceit and self-interest described in those old letters. He was the anchor, a living bridge between the ghosts of betrayal and the enduring truth of unconditional companionship. The gold, the silver, the deeds, they were material wealth, tangible proof of an unimaginable fortune. But the real treasure, the true discovery, was the painful, profound truth unearthed in the darkness. Ilara trembled, not from the cold, but from the sheer weight of what she had uncovered. The mine was not merely abandoned. It was a tomb, sealed generations ago, not by chance, but by a deliberate act to bury both a fortune and a terrible guilt. This discovery didn't just change her financial fate. It forced her to confront the insidious cost of pride and greed, a cost that rippled through time, touching her own life, her own ancestral struggles. The gold was merely a key, but the truth it unlocked was a revelation. Hours passed in that silent chamber, the lantern's oil burning low, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to embody the spirits of the past. When Ilara finally emerged from the mine, the iron chest carefully placed beside her, the sun was sinking below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. Jasper leaned against her leg, his presence a quiet, steadfast comfort. The gold would change her circumstances, yes, but it was the truth, raw and unvarnished, uncovered in the profound darkness of the earth, and the living, breathing loyalty of her faithful dog that had truly changed everything. The sun, a dying ember, finally slipped behind the distant peaks, leaving Alara and Jasper cloaked in the raw, creeping cold of the mountain night. The vibrant hues of sunset faded to bruised purples and deep, inky blues, reflecting the tumultuous landscape of her soul. The iron chest, squat and formidable, sat beside her, a stark monument to a past unearthed, a future irrevocably altered. Its weight wasn't just in the gold it held, but in the crushing burden of the secret it represented, the stories of betrayal and loss now intertwined with her own solitary existence. She ran a calloused hand over Jasper's warm fur, his steady presence the only anchor in a world that had, in a single day, spun violently off its axis. The thought of leaving the chest, even for a moment, was unthinkable. This fortune, ripped from the earth and steeped in tragedy, felt both a blessing and a curse. It was too vast, too dangerous to abandon. So, as the stars began to prick holes in the velvet sky, Alara made a decision. They would stay. They would endure this night, here at the mouth of the mine, guarding what felt less like treasure and more like a sleeping dragon. She gathered what little firewood she could find in the fading light, coaxing a meager flame to life, its flickering warmth a small defiance against the vast, indifferent wilderness and the deeper chill that had settled in her bones. Sleep, of course, was a stranger that night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, every distant howl of a coyote sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Her mind, usually a quiet, resigned landscape of survival, was now a roaring torrent. The miners' letters, their desperate pleas and tragic end, replayed in her thoughts like a haunting melody. Their faces, though unseen, were etched into the darkness behind her eyelids, their whispered grievances echoing from the cavernous depths of the mine. She saw her own father's tired eyes, the bitter lines of worry etched around his mouth as he fought a losing battle against debt. She felt again the sting of her mother's silent departure, the hollow ache of a family fractured by the very same forces, greed, desperation, and the crushing weight of circumstance that had condemned those men to their underground tomb. Jasper, ever vigilant, laid his head on her lap, his soft snores a comforting counterpoint to the storm raging within her. He was oblivious to the gold, to the deeds, to the betrayals written in fading ink. His world was simpler: loyalty, warmth, the hunt. And in his simple devotion, Alara found a profound, almost painful clarity. The gold was merely metal, a means to an end. The real change, the true transformation, lay in the truth she had uncovered and the steadfast, unwavering heart of the creature beside her. Money had destroyed lives, broken families, and buried men. But loyalty, simple and unadorned, had led her to this moment, had guided her through darkness, and remained a beacon in the terrifying brilliance of her discovery. As the first faint blush of dawn painted the eastern sky, Alara's exhaustion was absolute, but her resolve had hardened. The gold was too heavy to carry all at once, the deeds too precious to risk. She would have to make multiple trips or find a way to secure it more permanently. The immediate task was to return to her cabin, to think, to plan. The mountain, once her familiar, unforgiving home, now felt like a giant, watchful eye, holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do with its terrible secret. The journey back was slow, deliberate. Each step weighted not just by the chest she now carried with immense difficulty, but by the colossal burden of her newfound knowledge. The path she had walked 1,000 times, worn smooth by her solitary patrols for food and firewood, now felt alien. Every familiar tree, every moss-covered rock, seemed to watch her with a new, unsettling awareness. The bird song, usually a welcome sound, now felt almost mocking in its innocence. She walked with a new kind of fear, not of starvation or exposure, but of discovery, of the greedy eyes that had taken the miners' lives, now potentially turning towards her. The gold, heavy in her arms, felt like a magnet for all the darkness in the world. Reaching her dilapidated cabin, nestled precariously on the precipice of the wilderness, felt less like a homecoming and more like an intrusion. The familiar squalor, the threadbare blankets, the meager provisions, now stood in stark, almost grotesque contrast to the immense wealth she had just unearthed. The cabin, once a sanctuary from the world, now felt like a fragile shell, utterly unprepared for the magnitude of the secret she carried. She gently lowered the chest to the dirt floor, the metallic thud echoing in the small space like a death knell. Jasper, panting softly, curled up at her feet, his quiet presence a testament to enduring companionship. Alara sank onto her worn stool, her body aching, her mind a whirlwind. The sun was fully risen now, casting long, dusty shafts of light through the cracks in the walls, illuminating the poverty that had defined her life. But now it was a poverty she could escape. The gold, glinting dully in the chest, promised warmth, food, security, a life free from the relentless grind of survival. But it also carried the ghosts of betrayal, the whispers of lives cut short by avarice. The mine had given her more than just wealth. It had given her a profound, unsettling truth about the human heart, a truth that resonated deeply with the wounds of her own past. The mountain had kept its secrets for generations, but now, those secrets were hers to bear, a heavy crown upon a weary head. The weight of it all, the immense responsibility, settled upon her, a new, daunting landscape stretching out before her, far more challenging than any wilderness she had ever faced. There is a solemn truth whispered by the wind through ancient pines, a truth that echoes in the hollow chambers of the earth. Some secrets, once unearthed, demand more than just silence. They demand a reckoning. For Alara, the days that followed her return from the mine blurred into a single, grinding contemplation. The heavy iron chest, now tucked beneath her worn wooden table, seemed to pulse with a silent, dangerous energy. It was a stark, unyielding presence in her humble cabin, a monument to a past that refused to stay buried. Her hands, calloused from a lifetime of labor, trembled not from fatigue, but from the sheer, bewildering weight of the future that now lay before her, a future born from a forgotten tragedy. The meager light filtering through her single, grimy window illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the glint of gold that occasionally caught her eye from the chest's open lid. Jasper, ever her shadow, remained curled at her feet, his steady breathing a quiet counterpoint to the storm raging within her soul. He was a creature of instinct, of unwavering loyalty, and in his simple devotion, Alara found a fragile anchor against the terrifying complexities of her discovery. She spent those long, agonizing hours poring over the journals, the faded ink bleeding across the brittle pages like old wounds. Each entry was a step deeper into the lives of men long gone, men who had dreamed of prosperity and found only betrayal. She learned their names, their hopes, the small details of their daily lives that made their eventual fate all the more agonizing. There was Elias Thorne, meticulous in his records, detailing or yields and timber supports, his entries shifting from optimistic to increasingly desperate. Then, the frantic scrawl of Thomas Albright, his fear palpable even across a century, describing the growing tension, the whispers of double-crossing, the chilling certainty that their partners were not to be trusted. Finally, the fragmented, heartbreaking notes of Samuel Vance, scrawled in what must have been his final hours, detailing how the shafts were sealed, how the lies were spun, how their lives and their fortunes were buried together, not by accident, but by the deliberate, cold hand of avarice. The pages spoke of promises broken, of friendships poisoned by the lure of easy wealth, of a betrayal so profound it had entombed men alive, their cries unheard, their legacy erased. As Alara read, the mountain air in her cabin grew heavy with the ghosts of their voices. Their struggles became her struggles, their pain a mirror to her own. She saw her father's tired eyes, the bitter lines of worry etched around his mouth as he fought a losing battle against debt, against the relentless grind of a world that seemed determined to break him. She felt again the sting of her mother's silent departure, the hollow ache of a family fractured not by malice, but by the slow, insidious rot of financial pressure and pride, by the crushing weight of circumstance. The parallels were chilling, undeniable. The gold, glinting dully in the chest, promised warmth, food, security, a life free from the relentless grind of survival. But it also carried the ghosts of betrayal, the whispers of lives cut short by avarice. The mine had given her more than just wealth. It had given her a profound, unsettling truth about the human heart, a truth that resonated deeply with the wounds of her own past. The initial elation of discovery had curdled into a heavy, almost suffocating sense of responsibility. This wasn't just her fortune. It was a stolen legacy, a buried injustice. The gold, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a heavy chain, linking her to a past she never knew but now could not escape. She found herself staring at the chest, then at Jasper, whose quiet presence was a constant, living counterpoint to the tragic history she was uncovering. His simple needs, a full belly, a warm spot by the fire, a loving hand, were so utterly untainted by the human complexities of greed and betrayal. He was her anchor, her unwavering touchstone in a world that had suddenly become vast and terrifyingly complex. She realized that the mountain had kept its secrets for generations, but now, those secrets were hers to bear, a heavy crown upon a weary head. The weight of it all, the immense responsibility, settled upon her, a new, daunting landscape stretching out before her, far more challenging than any wilderness she had ever faced. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she couldn't simply take the gold and walk away. The truth demanded more. The miners, even in death, demanded more. And Alara, for the first time in a long time, felt a flicker of purpose beyond mere survival. A purpose born not of greed, but of an unsettling, profound obligation to the past and to the quiet, unwavering loyalty of the dog by her side. The gold could change her circumstances, but the truth, unearthed in the dark, was changing her very soul. The quiet hum of the wilderness outside Alara's cabin was a stark contrast to the tempest raging within her. The previous days had been a crucible, forging a new understanding in her weary soul. The gold, once a shimmering beacon of hope, now lay in the heavy iron chest, a tangible symbol of both salvation and profound burden. It pulsed with the quiet, dangerous energy of a secret finally brought to light, a monument to lives tragically cut short by avarice. Alara's calloused hands, accustomed to the rough labor of survival, trembled not from fatigue, but from the bewildering weight of a future she hadn't dared to dream, a future born from the cold, hard facts of a forgotten tragedy. Jasper, her loyal shadow, remained curled at her feet, his rhythmic breathing a steady counterpoint to the storm in her heart. He was a creature of instinct, of unwavering loyalty, his simple needs a stark contrast to the intricate, often poisonous, desires of humanity. In his steadfast devotion, Alara found a fragile anchor, a tether to the present amidst the swirling complexities of the past that now consumed her every waking thought. She had spent countless hours poring over the brittle pages of the miners' journals, their faded ink bleeding across the paper like old wounds refusing to heal. Each entry was a step deeper into the lives of men long gone, men who had sought prosperity and found only betrayal. She learned their names: Elias Thorne, meticulous in his records, his entries shifting from optimistic to desperate; Thomas Albright, whose frantic scrawl spoke of growing tension, whispers of double-crossing, the chilling certainty that their partners were not to be trusted; and finally, Samuel Vance, whose fragmented, heartbreaking notes, penned in what must have been his final hours, detailed the sealing of the shafts, the spinning of lies, the deliberate act of entombing lives and fortunes together. The pages spoke of promises shattered, of friendships poisoned by the lure of easy wealth, of the betrayals so profound had buried men alive, their cries unheard, their legacy erased. As Alara read, The mountain air in her cabin grew heavy, thick with the ghosts of their voices, their silent pleas echoing across a century. Their struggles became her struggles, their pain a mirror to her own. She saw her father's tired eyes, the bitter lines of worry etched around his mouth as he fought a losing battle against debt, against the relentless grind of a world that seemed determined to break him. She felt again the sting of her mother's silent departure, the hollow ache of a family fractured not by malice, but by the slow, insidious rot of financial pressure and pride, by the crushing weight of circumstance. The parallels were chilling, undeniable. The gold, glinting dully in the chest, promised warmth, food, security, a life free from the relentless grind of survival, but also carried the ghosts of betrayal, the whispers of lives cut short by avarice. The mine had given her more than just wealth. It had given her a profound, unsettling truth about the human heart, a truth that resonated deeply with the wounds of her own past. The initial elation of discovery had curdled into a heavy, almost suffocating sense of responsibility. This wasn't just her fortune. It was a stolen legacy, a buried injustice. The gold, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a heavy chain, linking her to a past she never knew but now could not escape. She found herself staring at the chest, then at Jasper, whose quiet presence was a constant, living counterpoint to the tragic history she was uncovering. His simple needs, a full belly, a warm spot by the fire, a loving hand, were so utterly untainted by the human complexities of greed and betrayal. He was her anchor, her unwavering touchstone in a world that had suddenly become vast and terrifyingly complex. She realized that the mountain had kept its secrets for generations, but now, those secrets were hers to bear, a heavy crown upon a weary head. The weight of it all, the immense responsibility, settled upon her, a new, daunting landscape stretching out before her, far more challenging than any wilderness she had ever faced. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she couldn't simply take the gold and walk away. The truth demanded more. The miners, even in death, demanded more. And Alara, for the first time in a long time, felt a flicker of purpose beyond mere survival. A purpose born not of greed, but of an unsettling, profound obligation to the past, and to the quiet, unwavering loyalty of the dog by her side. The gold could change her circumstances, but the truth, unearthed in the dark, was changing her very soul. Days bled into weeks. The gold sat, untouched, a silent sentinel in the corner of her cabin. Alara ate little, slept less, her mind a ceaseless churn of possibilities and perils. The raw, primal hunger for survival that had defined her existence had been replaced by a different kind of hunger, a hunger for justice, for resolution. She traced the faded names in the journals, imagining their faces, their laughter, their final despair. Their story, once a distant echo from the past, had become inextricably woven into the fabric of her own. She saw the betrayal not as a historical footnote, but as a living wound, festering through generations, its poison reaching even her, a solitary woman in a forgotten cabin. Jasper would nuzzle her hand, his soft fur a gentle reminder of the tangible world, of simple, honest affection. His eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to ask what tormented her, yet offered only unconditional comfort. He was a silent witness to her struggle, a living embodiment of the good that still existed, a stark contrast to the avarice that had consumed the miners' lives. It was his unwavering presence that often pulled her back from the precipice of despair, reminding her that not all bonds were fragile, not all loyalty could be bought or broken. She began to see the gold not as a prize, but as a key to unlocking not just her own future, but the future of the past. The letters spoke of families left behind, of debts unpaid, of reputations ruined. The injustice wasn't confined to the dark mine shaft. It had rippled outward, touching countless lives, a silent epidemic of suffering caused by a handful of greedy men. Alara, who had always felt invisible, forgotten by the world, now found herself at the center of a historical wrong, endowed with the power to right it. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating. The mountain had given her a voice, not for herself, but for those who had been silenced. The gold was merely the instrument. The truth was the true treasure, and its value far outweighed any monetary sum. She understood now that simply spending the money, even on herself, would feel like another betrayal, another act of burying the truth. The wealth was tainted, yes, but it could also be purified, transformed into a force for good. She saw a path, arduous and uncertain, but a path nonetheless, that stretched beyond the confines of her own survival. It was a path of restitution, of legacy, of finally giving those forgotten miners the peace they had been denied. The idea, once a faint whisper, grew into a roaring conviction, burning away the fear, replacing it with a quiet, fierce determination. The question was no longer if she would act, but how. The weight had not lessened, but its nature had changed. It was no longer just a burden, but a purpose. The question of how settled upon Alara with the weight of the mountain itself. It wasn't enough to simply know the truth. She now carried the heavy burden of acting upon it. The gold, glinting in the lantern light, was a silent, tempting promise of comfort, a balm for her own long-suffered hardships. Yet, it was also a poisoned chalice, steeped in the bitter history of betrayal and forgotten lives. How could she, a woman who had spent her life on the fringes, invisible to the world, suddenly become an agent of justice for ghosts? The scale of the task was monumental, a jagged peak far more formidable than any she had ever climbed, far more perilous than any storm or predator. Her fingers, gnarled and strong from a lifetime of labor, traced the faint lines on the old mining deeds. Names, dates, coordinates, fragments of a past that now demanded resurrection. Elias Thorne, meticulous in his records. Thomas Albright, whose frantic scrawl spoke of growing tension. Samuel Vance, whose fragmented, heartbreaking notes detailed the sealing of the shafts. Their stories, once confined to brittle pages, now breathed within her, whispering of broken promises and unfulfilled dreams. She saw the faces of their families, imagined their desperate hopes, their crushing despair when their men never returned, when their fortunes vanished into the earth alongside their loved ones. The injustice wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a living wound, festering through generations, its poison reaching even her, a solitary woman in a forgotten cabin, now burdened with its cure. Jasper, ever the silent sentinel, would nuzzle his head into her lap, his warm presence a gentle counterpoint to the chilling narrative she absorbed. His deep, knowing eyes seemed to peer into her very soul, offering a silent understanding that transcended words. He was a creature of simple truths, loyalty, sustenance, comfort. In his unwavering devotion, Alara found a fragile anchor, a tether to the tangible world, a reminder that not all bonds were fragile, not all loyalty could be bought or broken. He was a living embodiment of the good that still existed, a stark contrast to the avarice that had consumed the miners' lives, a beacon in the storm of her complex thoughts, a steady heartbeat in the silence of her cabin. The more she read, the more the enormity of her task became clear. Generations had passed. The original perpetrators of the betrayal were long dead, their names likely erased from memory, their ill-gotten gains perhaps long spent or dissolved into the vast currents of time. The families of the victims would be scattered, their lineages fractured, their very existence perhaps unknown to anyone outside their immediate kin. How would she find them? What proof would she offer? Who would believe the tale of an old mountain woman and her dog, emerging from the wilderness with a chest of gold and a century-old story of injustice? The world outside her cabin, a world she had largely forsaken, suddenly seemed a labyrinth of laws, bureaucracies, and skepticism she was ill-equipped to navigate. She understood now that simply spending the money, even on herself, would feel like another betrayal, another act of burying the truth. The wealth was tainted, yes, but could also be purified, transformed into a force for good. The gold was merely the instrument. The truth was the true treasure, and its value far outweighed any monetary sum. It was about restoring dignity, not just wealth, about ensuring that these forgotten lives were finally acknowledged, their sacrifice not in vain. The mountain had given her a voice, not for herself, but for those who had been silenced. And with that voice came an unsettling, profound obligation, a weight that paradoxically lightened her spirit even as it burdened her shoulders. The days stretched into weeks, then months. The seasons turned, marked by the changing hues of the forest outside her window. Alara moved with a renewed, almost ritualistic purpose. She studied the old maps found in the chest, comparing them to her own intimate knowledge of the surrounding terrain. She began to formulate a rudimentary plan, a slow, painstaking process of piecing together fragments of information. The names of nearby towns mentioned in the journals, the dates of land claims, the names of local officials from a bygone era. Each detail became a thread in a tapestry she was determined to weave. She imagined the journey to town, the questions she would ask, the people she would need to convince. The thought was daunting, her stomach clenching with a fear she hadn't felt since her own days of struggling for survival. Yet this fear was different. It wasn't the primal fear of starvation or the elements. It was the fear of failure, of not honoring the trust placed in her by the silent voices of the past. It was the fear of letting down Elias, Thomas, and Samuel, whose final words resonated in her mind like a solemn oath. She knew she couldn't simply appear with a chest of gold. She needed a strategy, a way to present the truth that would cut through generations of silence and skepticism. She needed to understand the mechanisms of the outside world, the very world she had fled, to bring justice to those who had been wronged by it, to bridge the chasm between a forgotten past and a skeptical present. Her mind, sharpened by years of resourceful survival, now bent itself to this new, complex challenge. She saw the gold not as a prize, but as a key to unlocking not just her own future, but the future of the past. It was a tool, a means to an end. She began to clean and organize the deeds, carefully preserving the fragile letters. Each evening, as the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls, she would read aloud to Jasper, her voice low and steady, as if sharing the burden with her loyal companion. He would lie contentedly by her feet, his ears occasionally twitching, a silent confidant to her extraordinary mission. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight bled through the pines, painting the cabin interior in hues of orange and purple, Alara held a tarnished silver locket found tucked within Samuel Vance's journal. Inside, a faded tintype of a young woman and a small child. His family. His reason for enduring the brutal conditions of the mine. His reason for fighting against the betrayal. A wave of profound empathy washed over Alara, solidifying her resolve. This wasn't just about gold. It was about lives, about love, about the fundamental human need for justice and remembrance, a universal plea echoing across a century. She looked at the iron chest, then at Jasper, who blinked slowly, his eyes reflecting the dying light. The decision was made. The path, though treacherous, was clear. She would leave the mountain, not as a desperate woman seeking survival, but as a messenger of truth, a reluctant guardian of a forgotten legacy. The gold would not just change her circumstances. It would be the instrument through which she would confront the cost of pride and greed across generations, and in doing so, find her own redemption. The truth, unearthed in the dark, had indeed changed everything, not just for her, but for the silent voices of the past who finally had a champion. The mountain, once her sanctuary, now felt like a launching pad. The cabin, a haven of solitude and silent understanding, transformed into a temporary command center. Alara had spent months preparing, each day a slow, deliberate act of severance from the life she had known. She cleaned the cabin with a meticulousness born of respect for the space that had sheltered her, tidying the few meager possessions, leaving it ready for whatever fate might decree. She knew, deep in her bones, that this departure was not merely a journey, but a metamorphosis. She was shedding the skin of the reclusive mountain woman, preparing to face a world that had long forgotten her, and one she had, in turn, deliberately forgotten. The day finally arrived, a crisp autumn morning painted with the stark beauty of frost-kissed leaves. A heavy mist clung to the valley floor, obscuring the world beyond the immediate rise, a fitting metaphor for the uncertainty that lay ahead. The iron chest, surprisingly heavy with the weight of both gold and history, was carefully secured on the back of her sturdy, albeit aged, mule, Old Bess. Alara had spent weeks coaxing Bess back into service, her gentle hands and patient words a testament to the bond forged over years of quiet companionship. Beside them, Jasper, his tail a steady pendulum of quiet anticipation, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. He looked up at Alara, his amber eyes reflecting a silent question. "Are we ready?" She ran a hand over the rough-hewn timber of her cabin door one last time, a farewell to the silent walls that had witnessed her despair, her resilience, and now, her newfound purpose. A sigh, heavy with a lifetime of memories, escaped her lips. The solitude she had embraced, the quiet rhythms of survival, the raw honesty of the wilderness. These were her truths. Now, she was venturing into a realm of human constructs, of laws and ledgers, of skepticism and the cold indifference of a world too busy to remember it's forgotten. This was the real wilderness now, a concrete jungle of human ambition and forgotten humanity, far more treacherous than any forest path. The descent was slow, deliberate. Each step took her further from the familiar embrace of the towering pines, closer to the distant murmur of civilization. The air grew thicker, heavier, carrying the faint, alien scent of wood smoke from other chimneys, of distant commerce. Jasper walked faithfully at her heels, occasionally casting a glance back at the receding peaks, as if sensing the magnitude of their departure. His presence was a constant, grounding force, a warm weight against her leg, a steady heartbeat in the vast silence of her internal struggle. He was the only thread connecting her to the simple, unburdened existence she was leaving behind, a living embodiment of the loyalty she now sought to restore to those long-dead miners. As they neared the first signs of human habitation, a crude, abandoned logging road, then the faint rut of a wagon trail, a profound sense of vulnerability washed over Alara. Years of self-reliance had instilled in her an almost animalistic wariness of others. She had learned to trust only the land, only her instincts, only Jasper. Now, she was willingly stepping into a world where trust was a commodity, often bought and sold, rarely freely given. Her weathered face, usually a mask of stoic determination, held a flicker of apprehension. How would she, a woman who spoke more to trees than to people, articulate the complex, century-old injustice she carried? The first town they encountered was little more than a cluster of weathered buildings clinging to the banks of a shallow river. It was a place she hadn't visited in decades, a ghost of a memory from her youth. The general store, its paint peeling like sun-scorched skin, seemed to eye her with suspicion. Men, their faces etched with the hard lines of labor, paused their conversations, their gazes lingering on her, on Bess, and most pointedly on the secured chest. Alara felt their eyes like physical prods, stripping away her anonymity, exposing her as an outsider, a relic from another time. She pulled her worn shawl tighter, a futile attempt to regain the invisibility she had long taken for granted. Her initial forays into the town were a humbling lesson in the world's indifference. She tried to make inquiries about old land records, about families long gone, her voice raspy from disuse, her words sounding oddly out of place in the bustling, albeit small, community. The storekeeper, a portly man with shrewd eyes, merely grunted, dismissing her as a harmless eccentric, a wild woman from the hills with fanciful notions. The local clerk, a young man barely out of his teens, looked at her with a mixture of pity and annoyance, pointing her vaguely towards the county seat, a full day's journey further. Each dismissal was a small cut, a reminder of her isolation, her lack of standing, her utter lack of credibility. Doubt, a serpent she thought she had vanquished, began to coil in her heart. Was this mission folly? Was she merely a deluded old woman chasing ghosts? The weight of the gold, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a crushing burden, a target on her back. She saw the glint in men's eyes as they eyed the chest, a flicker of the same greed that had sealed the miner's fate. It was a stark, chilling reminder that the world had not changed, that avarice remained a constant, a primal force as old as the mountains themselves. The betrayal wasn't just a story in a journal. It was a living, breathing specter, lurking in the shadows of human interaction. But then, Jasper would nudge her hand, his head resting against her thigh, his soft whine a gentle reassurance. In his unwavering loyalty, she found her compass. His simple faith in her, his unquestioning devotion, cut through the noise of doubt and the sting of dismissal. He reminded her of the purity of her intent, of the silent pact she had made with the forgotten. The gold was merely a means. The truth, the justice, the remembrance, these were the true treasures. And for those, she would endure the stares, the skepticism, the long, lonely road ahead. She would not be deterred. She understood now that her journey was not just about uncovering a historical wrong. It was about her own redemption, her own re-entry into the human fold. By championing the forgotten, she was, in a way, reclaiming her own place, finding her own voice after years of silence. The mountain had taught her resilience, but the outside world was teaching her patience, cunning, and a new kind of courage. The courage to face not just the elements, but the complexities of human nature, to navigate the intricate web of society she had once fled. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, Alara and her companions made camp on the outskirts of a small town, hidden from curious eyes. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper stories of old. She opened one of the journals again, reading the faded script by the flickering light, letting the voices of Elias, Thomas, and Samuel fill the silence. Their struggles, their hopes, their ultimate betrayal. They were no longer just words on a page. They were her companions, her silent counsel, urging her onward. She looked at Jasper, curled tightly against her side, his breathing slow and rhythmic. He was more than a dog. He was a living testament to steadfastness, a stark contrast to the human failings she was now confronting. He was the heart of her mission, the embodiment of the good she sought to bring forth. The road ahead was long, fraught with unseen obstacles, but Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not walk it alone. The mountain had given her a profound gift, not just the gold, but the truth, and with it, an unbreakable purpose. And that purpose, forged in the crucible of solitude and injustice, was now her guiding star. The first light of dawn, a fragile promise across the eastern peaks, found Alara already stirring. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a final embrace from the wilderness she was leaving behind. Her guiding star, that unwavering purpose, burned brighter than any distant sun. She had spent the night by the fire, the flickering flames illuminating the faded script of the journals, their stories weaving themselves into the fabric of her own resolve. Jasper, a warm weight against her side, had snored softly, a counterpoint to the silent voices of the past. As she packed the last of her meager belongings, securing the iron chest once more to old Bess's sturdy back, a new tremor ran through her. Not of fear, but of anticipation. The journey down, however, was far more than a physical descent. It was a journey through time, a crossing of invisible borders from a world of quiet survival to a realm of clamorous human complexity. The mountain paths, once familiar allies, now felt like a long, winding farewell. Each switchback, each descent into the lower valleys, pulled her further from the solace of the high peaks. The towering trees thinned, giving way to sparser woods, then to land scarred by logging, the raw stumps like open wounds on the earth. The air, once pure and sharp, began to carry the faint, unsettling tang of human activity, distant chimneys, unseen fires, the murmur of distant engines. Jasper, usually so eager on their daily rounds, walked closer than ever, his tail held low, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the environment. He seemed to understand the gravity of their passage, his watchful eyes mirroring Elara's own growing apprehension. The silence, once a comfort, now felt like a vulnerable exposed skin, leaving her open to the unseen judgments of the world below. The first true sign of civilization was a logging camp, long abandoned, its skeletal structures haunting the landscape. Then came the faint, rutted track of a wagon trail, a clearer path carved by human hands, leading her inevitably towards the world she had so carefully avoided. The transition was jarring. The wild, untamed beauty of the peaks gave way to a landscape shaped by human endeavor, often clumsily, sometimes brutally. Her heart, which had beat in rhythm with the mountain's pulse for so long, now felt a strange discord, a dissonance against the encroaching sounds of a world less wild, but no less dangerous. The small town, nestled in a valley carved by a winding river, appeared almost suddenly, a cluster of weathered buildings huddling together against the vastness of the landscape. It was a place she hadn't visited in decades, a ghost of a memory from her youth, now faded and altered. The general store, its paint peeling like sun-scorched skin, seemed to eye her with suspicion. Men, their faces etched with the hard lines of labor and suspicion, paused their conversations, their gazes lingering on her, on Bess, and most pointedly on the secured chest. Elara felt their eyes like physical prods, stripping away her anonymity, exposing her as an outsider, a relic from another time. She pulled her worn shawl tighter, a futile attempt to regain the invisibility she had long taken for granted. Her initial forays into the town were a humbling lesson in the world's indifference. Her voice, raspy from disuse, her words sounding oddly out of place, struggled to articulate the complex, century-old injustice she carried. She tried to make inquiries about old land records, about families long gone, but the storekeeper, a portly man with shrewd eyes, merely grunted, dismissing her as a harmless eccentric, a wild woman from the hills with fanciful notions. The local clerk, a young man barely out of his teens, looked at her with a mixture of pity and annoyance, pointing her vaguely towards the county seat, a full day's journey further. Each dismissal was a small cut, a reminder of her isolation, her lack of standing, her utter lack of credibility. The world, it seemed, had no time for forgotten tales, no patience for an old woman carrying the burdens of the past. Doubt, a serpent she thought she had vanquished, began to coil in her heart. Was this mission folly? Was she merely a deluded old woman chasing ghosts, her mind clouded by solitude and ancient grievances? The weight of the gold, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a crushing burden, a target on her back. She saw the glint in men's eyes as they eyed the chest, a flicker of the same greed that had sealed the miner's fate. It was a stark, chilling reminder that the world had not changed, that avarice remained a constant, a primal force as old as the mountains themselves. The betrayal wasn't just a story in a journal. It was a living, breathing specter lurking in the shadows of human interaction, ready to resurface. But then Jasper would nudge her hand, his head resting against her thigh, his soft whine a gentle reassurance. In his unwavering loyalty, she found her compass. His simple faith in her, his unquestioning devotion, cut through the noise of doubt and the sting of dismissal. He reminded her of the purity of her intent, of the silent pact she had made with the forgotten. The gold was merely a means. The truth, the justice, the remembrance, these were the true treasures. And for those, she would endure the stares, the skepticism, the long, lonely road ahead. She would not be deterred. She understood now that her journey was not just about uncovering a historical wrong. It was about her own redemption, her own reentry into the human fold. By championing the forgotten, she was, in a way, reclaiming her own place, finding her own voice after years of silence. The mountain had taught her resilience, but the outside world was teaching her patience, cunning, and a new kind of courage. The courage to face not just the elements, but the complexities of human nature, to navigate the intricate web of society she had once fled. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, Alara and her companions made camp on the outskirts of the small town, hidden from curious eyes. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper stories of old. She opened one of the journals again, reading the faded script by the flickering light, letting the voices of Elias, Thomas, and Samuel fill the silence. Their struggles, their hopes, their ultimate betrayal. They were no longer just words on a page. They were her companions, her silent counsel, urging her onward. She looked at Jasper, curled tightly against her side, his breathing slow and rhythmic. He was more than a dog. He was a living testament to steadfastness, a stark contrast to the human failings she was now confronting. He was the heart of her mission, the embodiment of the good she sought to bring forth. The road ahead was long, fraught with unseen obstacles, but Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not walk it alone. The mountain had given her a profound gift, not just the gold, but the truth, and with it an unbreakable purpose. And that purpose, forged in the crucible of solitude and injustice, was now her guiding star, guiding her through the treacherous currents of the human world, preparing her for the next daunting step. The wilderness holds its truths in stone and wind, clear and unyielding, etched into the very landscape for those with eyes to see and hearts to understand. But the world of man, that world wraps truth in paper, buries it under laws, and often lets it rot in the cold soil of indifference. This was the stark, chilling lesson Alara began to learn as she journeyed further from the mountain's embrace, carrying not just the weight of gold, but the far heavier burden of a century-old injustice. The road to the county seat was a descent not just in elevation, but in spirit. Each mile pulled her further from the familiar, comforting wildness, deeper into a landscape increasingly scarred by human ambition, its trees felled, its rivers dammed, its earth turned over for profit. The air, once sharp with pine and granite, grew thick with the smells of industry, of wood smoke and coal, a heavy scent that clung to her clothes and pressed against her lungs. Old Bess, usually so placid, seemed to sense the shift, her ears swiveling nervously at the distant clatter of machinery, her steps more hesitant on the increasingly rutted tracks. Jasper, ever her shadow, walked closer than ever, his head often nudging her hand, a silent plea for the familiar, for the quiet peace they had left behind. Alara felt it too, a growing unease, a tightening in her chest as the wild gave way to the tamed, the natural to the constructed. The mountain had always been an honest adversary. The world below felt like a labyrinth of unseen dangers and unspoken rules. The county seat itself was a jarring assault on her senses. Unlike the small, dusty town they had passed through, this was a place of brick and mortar, of straight lines and imposing facades. The courthouse, a grand, stern building of weathered stone, loomed over the town square, its tall, narrow windows like unblinking eyes, watching, judging. Carriages rumbled past, their wheels kicking up dust, their occupants casting quick, curious glances at the old woman on the shaggy horse, her dog trotting faithfully beside her. The sounds were a cacophony, the ringing of a blacksmith's hammer, the shouts of vendors, the murmur of countless voices, a symphony of human existence that overwhelmed the profound silence she had known for so long. Alara felt utterly exposed, a relic from a forgotten time, her worn clothes and weathered face a stark contrast to the finer fabrics and smoother visages around her. The anonymity she had cherished, the invisibility that had been her shield, was utterly stripped away. She felt a profound loneliness, even amidst the crowds, a sense of being utterly out of place, a stranger in a land of her own people. Her first attempts to navigate this labyrinth of officialdom were met with a wall of polite, yet impenetrable, indifference. She entered the courthouse, its echoing halls smelling of old paper and dust, a place where whispers seemed to get lost in the high ceilings. She spoke to clerks, their faces impassive behind spectacles, their fingers stained with ink. She tried to explain the story of Elias and Thomas and Samuel, of the hidden mine, the journals, the gold, the deeds. She spoke of betrayal and injustice, of a truth buried for generations. But her words, so clear and resonant in the mountain air, seemed to dissolve in the sterile confines of the office. They looked at her with a mixture of confusion and thinly veiled condescension, their eyes flickering to Jasper, who sat patiently at her feet, then to her worn hands, and finally, dismissively, back to their ledgers. "Land records are complex, ma'am," one young clerk said, barely looking up, his voice devoid of emotion. "These things take time. Proof. Legal standing. You'll need an attorney. Documents. Not just stories." Each dismissal was a fresh wound. Each bureaucratic hurdle, a heavy stone, added to her burden. The weight of the gold, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a curse, a tangible symbol of the very greed that had led to the miner's demise, and now, perhaps, to her own undoing. Doubt, a creeping shadow she thought she had banished, returned with a vengeance, whispering insidious questions. Was this folly? Was she merely a deluded old woman chasing ghosts, her mind clouded by solitude? Had the mountain, in its silent wisdom, given her a fool's errand? She felt a profound weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond physical toil. It was the weariness of trying to bridge an impossible gap between two worlds, the raw, honest world of the wilderness and the convoluted, often cruel world of human institutions. The betrayals written in those old letters were not just historical facts. They were living specters, manifesting in the coldness of bureaucratic forms, the glint of suspicion in a clerk's eye, the dismissive wave of a hand. But then, as always, Jasper would stir. He would rest his head on her knee, his warm eyes meeting hers, a silent, unwavering pool of loyalty in a sea of indifference. His soft whine, his gentle nudge, was a lifeline, pulling her back from the precipice of despair. He reminded her of the simple, undeniable truth she carried, a truth that needed no ledger or legal jargon to validate. His steadfastness was a stark contrast to the human failings she now confronted, a quiet testament to a purity of purpose that transcended the world's complexities. He was the anchor, the living embodiment of the good she sought to bring forth. And in his eyes, Elara saw not a foolish old woman, but a champion, a vessel for justice. The mountain had taught her resilience, but this world, this sprawling, indifferent human construct, was teaching her a new kind of courage, the courage to be patient, to be cunning, to learn the rules of a game she never wished to play. She would not be deterred. The gold was merely a key. The truth, the justice, the remembrance, these were the true treasures. And for those, she would endure the stares, the skepticism, the long, lonely road ahead. She understood now that her journey was not just about uncovering a historical wrong. It was about her own redemption, her own reentry into the human fold. By championing the forgotten, she was, in a way, reclaiming her own place, finding her own voice after years of silence. She would learn their laws, she would find their loopholes, she would make them listen. As dusk settled, painting the courthouse windows in hues of fiery orange, Elara and her companions made camp just outside the county seat, hidden among the sparse trees, the iron chest secured once more to Bess's back. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper stories of old. She opened one of the journals again, reading the faded script by the flickering light, letting the voices of Elias, Thomas, and Samuel fill the silence. Their struggles, their hopes, their ultimate betrayal. They were no longer just words on a page. They were her companions, her silent counsel, urging her onward. She looked at Jasper, curled tightly against her side, his breathing slow and rhythmic. He was more than a dog. He was a living testament to steadfastness, a stark contrast to the human failings she was now confronting. He was the heart of her mission, the embodiment of the good she sought to bring forth. The road ahead was long, fraught with unseen obstacles, but Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not walk it alone. The mountain had given her a profound gift, not just the gold, but the truth, and with it, an unbreakable purpose. And that purpose, forged in the crucible of solitude and injustice, was now her guiding star, guiding her through the treacherous currents of a human world, preparing her for the next daunting step. The world of man, unlike the steadfast mountain, is a shifting, treacherous landscape, its paths paved not with stone but with paper, its truths buried under layers of law and the dust of indifference. Alara, having found her purpose in the wilderness, now faced its greatest test in the very heart of civilization. Her initial attempts to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of the county courthouse were met with a polite, yet impenetrable, wall of skepticism. Clerks, their faces impassive behind polished desks, shuffled papers with a practiced efficiency that seemed designed to keep the world at bay. They listened, or pretended to, their eyes darting from her worn clothes to Jasper, who sat patiently at her feet, a silent, furry sentinel against the coldness of officialdom. Her tales of hidden minds, of faded journals and ancient betrayals seemed to evaporate in the sterile air, dismissed as the fanciful ramblings of an old woman. Land claims are complex, ma'am, one young man droned, his voice devoid of empathy, requiring extensive documentation, legal precedents, and often years of litigation. We cannot simply take your word for it. Each refusal, each dismissive glance, chipped away at her resolve. The weight of the iron chest, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a leaden burden, a tangible reminder of the very greed that had consumed Elias, Thomas, and Samuel. Doubt, that insidious whisper she thought she had silenced in the mountain's embrace, returned with a vengeance. Was she a fool, chasing ghosts in a world that had long forgotten them? Was the truth she clutched so fiercely just another forgotten tale in a world too busy to listen? The loneliness she had known in the wild was a quiet, almost comforting solitude. This loneliness, amidst the bustling crowds, was a crushing isolation, a profound sense of being utterly out of place. But then, a warmth would press against her leg. A soft muzzle would nudge her hand, and Jasper's steadfast eyes would meet hers. In that gaze, unwavering and pure, she found her anchor. He didn't understand legal jargon, but he understood loyalty and the quiet dignity of perseverance. His unwavering presence was a stark contrast to the human complexities she faced, a living testament to a truth that needed no paper or law to validate. He reminded her that the truth of Elias, Thomas, and Samuel was not just a legal matter, but a human one, a story of betrayal that echoed across generations, demanding to be heard. She sought out others, older men with kind eyes in dusty law offices, their desks piled high with forgotten cases. Some listened with a flicker of interest, others with a cynical weariness. She spoke of the mine of the gold, yes, but more so of the letters of the broken trust, the stolen livelihoods. She spoke of the parallels to her own life, the way promises could shatter, the way absence could leave a wound that never truly healed. She spoke of her family's debts, the arguments that had driven her kin apart, the abandonment that had left her to face the world alone. In the faded words of those long-dead miners, she saw her own story, not of gold, but of the far more precious currency of trust and its devastating cost when betrayed. It was a slow, arduous process. Days bled into weeks. She learned the language of the law, the tedious dance of forms and filings. She found a sympathetic, if world-weary, attorney, a man named Mr. Finch, whose eyes held a hint of the mountain's quiet wisdom. He saw not just a potential case, but a woman with an undeniable truth in her heart. He cautioned her about the long road, the entrenched interests, the powerful forces that would resist the unearthing of such a buried secret. But he also saw the glint of steel in her weathered gaze, the quiet strength that had carried her through a lifetime of hardship. With Mr. Finch's guidance, the first tentative steps were taken. Petitions were filed, old records painstakingly cross-referenced. The whispers of a forgotten mine, once dismissed as folklore, began to gain a fragile footing in the cold, hard world of legal precedent. Alara understood that this was not a quick victory, not a sudden windfall. This was a battle that would stretch into months, perhaps years, a slow, deliberate chipping away at a century of silence. The gold, she realized, was merely the catalyst, the spark that had ignited a far greater purpose. Her true mission was not to claim riches, but to resurrect a forgotten truth, to give voice to those who had been silenced by greed, and in doing so, to heal a wound that ran deeper than any vein of ore. The county seat, with its clamor and complexities, had taught her much. It had shown her the enduring nature of human avarice, but also the quiet power of persistence, the unexpected kindness of strangers, and the unyielding strength of her own spirit. She had faced the world, not as a recluse, but as a champion, carrying the weight of history and the hope of justice. But the city was not her home. The air, thick with human enterprise, felt heavy in her lungs. The ceaseless noise grated on her nerves. Her heart yearned for the profound silence of the peaks, for the scent of pine and granite, for the unwavering embrace of the wild. One crisp morning, with the first hint of autumn in the air, Alara made her preparations. Mr. Finch had done what he could for now, the legal machinery set in motion. The battle was joined, but it would be fought on paper in courtrooms, a realm far removed from the raw earth where the truth had first been found. Alara, Bess, and Jasper turned their backs on the county seat, their faces once more towards the rising sun, towards the distant purple haze of the mountains. The journey back was different. She was no longer just a poor woman seeking survival. She was a woman carrying a profound understanding, a woman whose spirit had been tempered in the crucible of both wilderness and civilization. As they ascended the familiar trails, the world seemed to shed its layers of human artifice. The air grew cleaner, sharper. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a hawk, the rhythmic thud of Bess's hooves. Jasper trotted ahead, his tail wagging, as if leading them home. And home, she realized, was not just her small cabin, but the very heart of the mountain, the place where everything had begun. They arrived at the mine as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and deep violet. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and ancient stone. The collapsed opening, now partially cleared, looked less like a tomb and more like a gateway. The iron chest, lighter now that some of its contents were with Mr. Finch, was placed carefully on the ground beside her. Alara stood there, silhouetted against the fading light, the vast, indifferent beauty of the wilderness stretching out around her. Jasper, sensing the moment, leaned gently against her leg, his warm presence a comfort against the chill of the evening. She looked at the mine entrance, a dark maw in the hillside. Inside lay the gold, the silver, the deeds, the tangible evidence of betrayal and untold wealth. But more importantly, inside lay the truth, etched into the journals, whispered by the rusted tools and broken timbers. It wasn't just a mine sealed by a rock slide. It was a chamber sealed by the crushing weight of human deceit, a tomb for both treasure and guilt. The discovery had not merely presented her with riches. It had forced her to confront the profound cost of pride and greed, not just in the past, but in the echoes that had shaped her own fractured life. The mountain had given her not just gold, but a mirror. In the story of Elias, Thomas, and Samuel, she had seen a reflection of her own family struggles, their own unspoken betrayals, their own silent departures. The gold offered a path to escape the burden of poverty, to mend the broken fences of her past, perhaps even to reclaim a piece of what had been lost. But it was the truth, raw and unyielding, uncovered in the cold darkness of that forgotten chamber, that had truly changed everything. And beside her, a living, breathing testament to unwavering devotion, was Jasper. His steady loyalty, a stark contrast to the betrayals written in those old letters, was the purest treasure of all. As the last light bled from the sky, and the first stars began to prickle through the darkening canvas, Alara knew. The gold would change her circumstances, yes. It would offer a future she had never dared to dream of. But the true wealth, the profound transformation, lay not in the shimmering metal, but in the clarity of understanding, in the quiet dignity of seeking justice for the forgotten, and in the enduring, unconditional love of her dog. She was no longer just a poor mountain woman. She was a keeper of truth, a vessel of justice, and a woman profoundly, irrevocably changed by the secrets the earth had finally yielded and the steadfast heart that had guided her through it all. The wilderness had opened its heart to her, and in return, she had found her own.